Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. This is a topic that a lot of the Huntington's disease community experiences, and it's kind of like, how can we help you build the tools to advocate for yourself and for your family when it comes to long-term care settings if your loved one is under the age of 55, doesn't meet that threshold of age-based placement. So if you don't know me, I'm Erica Belofsky. I'm your community outreach specialist with HD Reach. And today I have Grant DeHaven. I am so excited that he's on with me today. At around 40 years old, he was trying to find a placement for his wife, Heather, who has Huntington's disease. And it has been a long road. So I wanted to introduce Grant, if you can go ahead and talk a little bit about your story and add a lot more context to that. And then we're going to really dive into what can we do as an advocacy organization, as the HD community, to make change and build change moving forward for placement for our loved ones with HD, especially those under the age of 55. So Grant, I'm going to throw it to you.
Thank you, Erica. I really appreciate you having me here. And like you said, this is a topic that has impacted my family dramatically as the past few years have gone by. As you said, my wife Heather has Huntington's. It was always that unknown in the family, going through her youth with her mother having the disease and making that decision of testing. We went through that same journey that many of those with HD go through, as far as to get tested, not get tested. And I know that's, a whole nother discussion. But ultimately, in Heather's early 30s, I started to notice symptoms of things that became concerning. And after we had a discussion as far as, hey, we need to get this looked at, we pursued the testing and obtained the diagnosis that she was in fact gene positive for Huntington's. For a while, care at home obviously was fine. Her symptoms were by no means anything that was where we could not, both my kids and I, we have two kids, a daughter and a son, could not take care of her, and life was fine. When going into her late 30s, we started having a lot of difficulty, and that's when we had to have the real discussions with advocates out there as far as, can we truthfully give her the best care in the home, especially that we were a young family, myself still prime working age, Heather, of course, at that same age, and then two kids that were, one a teenager, one actually not even a teenager yet, who were really falling into a caregiving role. So as we started to speak with advocates, look at websites, look at guidance that was provided both from HD Reach and HDSA and a lot of different entities out there, we made the decision and said, hey, we need to look at what's out there that can at least supplement this care at home, or potentially get her to a location that would provide better care than we could provide. So we know that's a very tough decision. And going in, like you said, to what that journey was like. Ultimately, after we went to both her neurologist and our primary care physician, they agreed with our assessment that, okay, yeah, we think we would advise. Nobody really at any point is going to tell you must, right? It's always a gray area, and that's the tough thing, is you get to that point where you think it's a black and white thing where you will know, yes, we have to do it, but it's never going to be like that. It's such an emotional event, and the mental turmoil of that decision and all those emotions are real. So ultimately, when we got to the point to say, hey, let's just at least assess what this environment looks like with long-term care. Step one, and I know we talked a little bit about this before, was to obtain a recommendation form from our doctor that says, yeah, I would recommend this particular level of care for Heather, and pursue those settings. So that's really where our journey began with, I guess, probably what you and I will get into further on in the webinar. And I can march right into that, or if you want to ask me particular questions, you just let me know.
No, I think that's a great starting point, because I think you've acknowledged like I love that you mentioned that there's not this, it's not black and white when it comes to finding care for your loved one, especially with HD, right? You're talking about a young family, you're talking about your young wife, you're talking about career and like trying to keep a roof over the head. You're talking about love for your partner and wanting to do what's best for everyone involved. And you don't always get that. It is time for, you need to do XYZ. It's usually, well, I guess you need to start having conversations and figuring out what's best for you, which is okay, but it doesn't give you that black and white, this is what you need to do.
You're exactly right. I mean, the fact is that I was looking for that. I was seeking that moment where I said, yes, 100%, we
Mm-hmm.
need to do it. But it's tough to get there because, like I said, there's no one out there that's a resource or an advocate that's going to say you must. Nobody is ever going to tell you that from an outside perspective. At least those that are within the medical profession or social work profession. But there are what I would call tripwires, if you will. There are indicators that once you start to demonstrate that you're experiencing those, they would say, you know what, that's usually what we look for. For example, with young kids, if you're finding that you have at risk HD children who are now going into a caregiving setting and taking care of their parents, that impacts their youth. That impacts their own development and ability in the future to deal with that decision. So that became one of those that when Heather and and Heather was still in a position where we could have a real discussion about, okay, how can we best take care of the medical needs you have? We both supported that. That was our number one priority, was ensuring that our children had as much of a normal childhood as they could. And there's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of stigma people have about long-term care. And I can tell you, I contacted one organization that was adamantly against placing people, and placing, I don't like to use that word, having an extended family within a care community. They were adamantly against that pursuit. And I feel like with Huntington's, it really comes to the real question. The real question is, are you capable, you as a family, you as an individual, to give that loved one the level of care and attention they need in the home setting? And with that said, not only are you able to give them that level of care, but is your relationship dynamic not good? Because what you will find with caregiving in general, caregivers get stressed. I mean, I got ridiculously stressed. And that does not make you a great person. That can make you an upset person, an angry person, and it can rip apart relationships. And what I would say, with Heather's situation, she has absolutely amazing care now at Bayview Nursing and Rehab in New Bern. And we have a regimented schedule where Heather comes home, Heather spends weekends at home. There are mechanisms in place to make sure that the family unit stays kept together. So more than anything, that community at Bayview is an extended family. There is not Bayview and then home. It's one big family that takes care of Heather, and she is thriving. Her personality is better. Our home dynamics are better. But it's that stigma before that decision that it's almost like you're getting rid of somebody, and that is not the truth at all. That's the stigma that I think has to be broken down within the under 55, under quote unquote elderly community. That when you're dealing with rare or neurodegenerative diseases, Huntington's in particular, there's a stigma, that you're trying to hand that person off, and that's not how it is. If you get a good care community and a good plan in place for long-term care.
Thank you, Grant. I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, we need to break through that, but we also need to be able to place our loved ones, right? We need to be able to find our loved ones placement who are under 55, who like we would hope could go into, even if it's more of like an assisted, like if they're not even skilled nursing, like having that assisted living, having that care home. And I know here within North Carolina, it's extremely difficult. Any type of independent living, like those levels of care, and I'm going to list in this webinar like what those levels of care kind of like require and what that looks like. But um, within those like lower levels of care where you might need somebody that needs a little bit more monitoring, might need some medication assistance, but they're fairly active. They can't cook meals for themselves. Dangerous to be left at home because they just want to probably go or just won't stay in the home while their family's working out at school, this and that. And that environment, I've heard, it's very dependent on the person, but there have been people that have thrived if they are able to. But that age issue, if they're not over 55, is such a barrier. So, like, I guess, let's go back to like what you were talking about, like your steps, what the process was for you specifically here in North Carolina. And for other states, like, it's going to be kind of a similar, like, kind of list, but, might not be called an FL2 that you get from your doctor or whatnot. But I would love to kind of go through the steps that kind of you recommended that you took and what that experience was like for you.
Absolutely. No, that's it really is key for anyone who's going through this process or thinking about potentially going through this process in the future to understand that the process is intimidating.
Hmm.
But if you break it down into phases, it's manageable and it's really not that hard. And like you said, we'll get into sort of some of the issues that we confront. Step one is obviously for me was making that decision, crossing that line, getting over that wall that we're going to make this pursuit for some sort of expansion of care, either within the home, a community or facility. I like to call them communities. I know
Hmm.
in policy they call them facilities. Um, but what I would say, if you start with in-home care, there are in-home care mechanisms in place. For example, with Heather, a lot of it was fall risk. And let's admit, our loved ones with Huntington's, a lot of them don't realize the symptoms they have. So, they want to keep moving, they want to keep going, and that's good for them. But with that said, the risk level it gets dangerous and it could lead to catastrophic things happening. But there are mechanisms you can use at home to start with. There are companies that provide short-term assistance at home with monitoring your loved one, and those care capabilities can go into 24/7 type capabilities in homes, but that's a resourcing payment type issue. That's all going to be on you to pay for. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but let's get on to the recommendation by the physician, like you said. In North Carolina is called an FL2, and that will be what you will need in your possession before you start moving forward with researching communities or facilities. So that doctor will have a form that says, yes, I recommend that we pursue a given level of care. And that in North Carolina, that form will list, I think there's 6 or 7 options, but the 2 options that really were pivotal to us was one was assisted living care, and the other was skilled nursing care, which oftentimes is synonymous with nursing homes. So, when you get that form, that equips you to go out and look for that particular level of care. What facilities are local or I guess anywhere that have that particular level of care. So when you get into assisted living or skilled nursing, the first thing I did is I contacted the advocates that are out there, whom I at least assumed were there to support this pursuit. The number one person or that you should look at is within your medical network or medical provider. There should be a care coordinator. Usually, it's a nurse or somebody administrative within your family practitioner's office or within the office of a specialist. That's designed to start looking out in the community and provide you with resources of what's out there to help you out in the community. So, for example, our specialist for neurology was Duke, and we did not live in that area. So we went through our family practitioner, and the care coordinator gave us an abundance of information about what's available out in the New Bern area that could assist us. And then ultimately was our first level advocate for making contact with particular facilities to inquire about seeking care for Heather. So that is step one, is really that care coordinator. Your county social services office. So the way it works in North Carolina is all the health and human services policy, social service policy falls under the state. So it's all state law, state policy that's applied, but it's handed over to the counties to execute that policy or to execute and monitor those licensing requirements. So if you contact the state, for example, the Department of Health and Human Services, they're more than likely going to refer you to your county because your county is the one that's equipped to address your local apparatus for care. So that's someone else to kind of get in your corner. So I guess at this phase, it's more about just kind of building your team. So you have your care coordinator for your medical office practitioner. You have your social services office for the county. There is also an entity called an ombudsman. The ombudsman office is usually in North Carolina regionally based, and it is a position that is designed to advocate for those, and here's the key word within care communities. So it's the gap with them is that they're not designed really to help people get into the communities, but they're there once they are there. They serve as an advocate to ensure laws and policies are applied. However, I would definitely recommend that you contact them because they too have an abundance of resources for what is out there in the local community. And there's a good news story to that in our journey because of our affiliation and relationship with the ombudsman. And then nonprofit advocates like HD Reach, obviously reaching out and getting the list of communities that have been gathered by nonprofits and advocates is critical. So sort of building that Rolodex of people who are now on your team to start going out and looking for care. Now, here's when the battle begins. So I guess this is kind of the meat of the discussion or the question as it was when you start calling, and again, I was a complete novice to this. I didn't have, we did not do a great job setting ourselves up for this. I know with Huntington's, a lot of people make that early decision for testing and they go ahead and take measures. That was not our collective decision. We decided to move on with life, and then we were faced with some hard issues later on. So when we started looking for long-term care facilities, what we basically learned in general, both assisted living and nursing homes, was that you had communities that were private pay only, which means that it's basically dependent on your own resources, your salary, your retirement, your assets, or long-term care insurance that you have paid in for with employers. And then there's Medicaid accepting facilities. Now, some are both. I mean, I would say some are private pay and Medicaid accepting. So that's a group. And then some are merely private pay. So when I started calling, I realized that there was an abundance, more than I anticipated, of local facilities that were private pay only. And this is one of those frustrating things, for better or for worse. You will have a community, let's just say, I'm just going to make up a town, Smithville, because I know there's a Smithville, I better not get in trouble here. So let's go to Smithville, right? So ultimately, you go to Smithville and there's this nice facility or community there called the Gardens of Smithville. And then what you find out or might find out is that they are actually owned under a management firm that could be based out of New York. And that management firm owns uh, a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen communities across the country. And what that does is it provides them, well, it helps them with their management of the procedures, but it also provides them massive financial overhead. So that facility can say, you know what, I don't want to deal with Medicaid laws anymore. I don't want to deal with these inspections that have to do with am I assisting one person enough with toileting, bathing, feeding, and these requirements with the government system. We are completely out of that. So again, for better or for worse, those communities typically are really, really nice. But long-term care is expensive. Long-term care is tremendously expensive. These communities can be anywhere from $3,000 to $8,000, if not more, a month for this care. So these communities, really, what you will find is that it's marginalizing people in communities who do not have the wealth or the means established. So it's really kind of saying we're only going to take care of the people who have these private capabilities to pay. Um, and again, that is something that's kind of difficult to chew on. But what I say is when you make first contact to a community, the question you have to ask for one is how are you paying? So if you're someone who's still working age, you don't have long-term care insurance, because I can tell you, anyone who's dealt with long-term care insurance, you get that from your employer and you're like, hey, that looks great, but wait, my premium every month is $200. I got to pay that every month, but I may not need care in the future. That's a hard pill to chew on. So
Mhm.
um, so ultimately, people decide like I don't want that. I'll figure it out down the road. So if you don't have that insurance and you're not retired and you don't have really a massive amount of assets, you're likely going to depend on government assistance. You're going to depend on the Medicaid program. So with that said, when you call these communities, the first question you need to ask is, do you accept Medicaid? And if they say no, you just scratch them off the list. You move on. So really don't waste your time, because I wasted my time tremendously diving into um, kind of trying to separate these communities out. So already go ahead and eliminate them from the list. So once you narrow that list down and you call these communities, your first point of contact, because who knows who's going to answer the phone. So here's the cautionary tale: is just don't let somebody that answers the phone answer all your questions and give you a response. The person who should be answering the phone, or you should be asking for, is the admissions director. The admission director is across the board going to be the person who is supposed to be the first point of contact for considering admission. If you can't reach them, or they don't call back for the administrator. The administrator, again, that's going to be within assisted living facilities and skilled nursing facilities. That is that's the leadership of the community itself. So those two people should be the only ones who provide you any guidance, any information, acceptance or denial for a community. So that's one thing. Is just be cautious of who you're talking to when you call these facilities, and that should be who you get the answer from. So that kind of gets you from, okay, step one down to, let's get you down to actually making contact with communities.
How did you know that you were going to be Medicaid eligible?
So again, with that social service advocate, while you're kind of going through this process, because nobody is going to do it for you, as much stress as you're under. And I get it. Like, it would have been nice for someone just to take the whole thing and say, hey, just find me a good place. Um, but for one, again, you want to have that power and control to make sure your loved one is adequately taken care of. So, really, with that social service advocate, that's the one who is going to be processing. That county social services office is going to be the entity that's processing your Medicaid. So, they will not do that. They will provide you guidance on the process. They will get initial information from you as far as your qualification and how to become qualified if you aren't already, because there are some things financially you have to look at that are scary on the surface, but going through the process, they're not. So there are attorneys out there who will help you with that process and can help you set things up with estate planning. I'm all for it. When you get into Medicaid, I would say my recommendation would be before going to an attorney, um, because my own fear, and this is my own opinion, there are some attorneys who are very well equipped and have the best interest in mind. There are others that are a little bit predatory. They want to kind of utilize that belief of complication that you have no other way, and they want to exploit that and well make money off of it. So I would say before you contact them, go to social services, because what I found is our social services care worker was an immense advocate for ensuring that we were approved, and that we set up our finances in a way to make sure it allowed us to live comfortably with Heather in the facility and with us at home. Um, so it is intimidating, but so you will not go through the actual process of getting Medicaid until your loved one is already admitted. So once they are admitted, the facility will work with social services to make sure that Medicaid is filed and they start to get those payments. So that process was pretty easy, to be honest with you, once we got through it. But that's county social service caseworker is going to be the one that you're utilizing to get information about the Medicaid process. And then once you find a bid space, they are going to be the ones who are assisting with making sure that you get that approval. If there's any hiccups along the way, they will help you resolve those issues.
I think you brought up a really great point too. That individually, like for everyone going through this process, there can be predatory attorneys. For your experience, you had a great caseworker. It can depend on the individual, the county, and things like that. So for anybody watching this video, you have to kind of go with what you feel comfortable with. For some people, like, okay, if you are looking into an attorney, there's certified Medicaid planning attorneys that may be able to do some. Listen, there's some Medicaid has like a 5-year look back. So there may be some rearranging, some special things that you might not actually get from the Medicaid office, and vice versa. If you experience an attorney that you feel is kind of really just doesn't feel right and is very expensive and wants to charge for every arm and leg for every little thing, talking with your local county caseworker may also be a lot more beneficial to you. So individually, like if you are going for an attorney, check to see if they're a certified Medicaid planning attorney. If you do touch base with your local county caseworker, you should feel comfortable with that as well, that you truly feel like you have an advocate within your corner, which I'm so glad that you had one. And not everyone's experience is like that, which is unfortunate. But you highlighted that also there are some incredible advocates out there who are doing amazing work to make this process much smoother for somebody who's trying to find placement or find a community.
Yeah, you said it absolutely. I found that the vast majority of people out there at all angles were extremely supportive, were extremely empathetic. I felt what became a struggle was the bureaucratic red tape that they all, and as a government worker, as a vet, I understand, government bureaucracy and sort of the stuff we deal with internally. And some of these people are kind of working within these policies, and they're afraid to really go on the periphery of, okay, this is different, this doesn't really fit into what I do, I might get in trouble, if I pursue this. So there's concerns, with how they go about something that kind of isn't really captured, sort of falls beneath the cracks. And that's what I would say this whole thing does, with under 55. It Well, and we'll talk about it. It's very clear in law. It's very clear in North Carolina statute, but it's just the understanding of that. And without someone who's an advocate that's looking, between those cracks and finding that we're slipping between there, it won't get better. So, but great people out there. And like you said, with social services, yeah, I know it's going to be hit or miss, not just it's county to county, state to state, but even within counties, everybody's a
Hmm.
little bit different.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we found one that they were looking out for us. And I guess that's kind of to go on, piggyback with what you said. If you don't feel like your attorney is looking out for you and your family, if you don't feel like your social worker or your caseworker is looking out for you, then yeah, go somewhere else. If it's a caseworker, go to their supervisor, ask for another caseworker. But I know this is stressful. It's stressful, and people just want to get through the process. So again, kind of building up that resilience and making sure you, as an advocate for your loved one and a caregiver, are taking care of yourself. Don't let yourself slip, because that is a huge concern. Is it's the load of the stress, both trying to deal with this on someone's health as a caregiver, and that's just to be honest with it. But yeah, you're exactly right. I couldn't have said it any better with the fact you just have to make sure they're in your corner.
I guess continue. We're going into more of like the laws and licensing, because I know you mentioned like within North Carolina specifically, like what is said, what can others look into within their state laws? How do they do that? And how does this help them advocate for their loved ones?
Yeah, this is really the topic that, from an advocacy standpoint, needs to be mitigated. This in My story is, we first pursued assisted living level of care for Heather. Our FL2 recommendation from a physician was for assisted living. With Huntington's is tough because the symptoms are so dynamic, and so different than what most diseases present, that you really can look at both from the beginning, both skilled nursing and assisted living. But we started with assisted living. We're like, this seems to be the good fit. So when we started to call assisted living facilities, again, I already figured out the Medicaid thing. So I'm like, okay, do you accept Medicaid? And once they said yes, I would say, okay, here's my situation. My wife is 40. She has Huntington's disease. We have an FL2 for assisted living. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry. And this was from many facilities, various counties. Oh, I'm sorry, we only accept 55 and older. And, I kind of, as I hopped around communities, I was like, I finally asked one, because some of these admission directors were very talkative. They were very nice. Like I said, they're very empathetic. And I'm like, what's that? What is that from? And I can tell you, Erica, many of them said, and I know you're going to bring up this insurance thing later on, which I kind of laugh at, but um, most of them said our licensing, and they didn't really seem to be knowledgeable on why, but they said we just know something about our license. So eventually, I was like, you know what? I deal with policy for the government. It's like, I'm going to go see if I can figure this out. So I went, it's all out there. So if you go to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services website, specifically the Division of Health Service Regulation, that is where you'll actually see the license applications for all the different care communities, whether it's a nursing home or it's assisted living. So I went into the application and I started reading it. And okay, so there's this portion of it, there's a question that says, will you be providing care to elderly people? And you have to check yes or no. So if you check yes, and really quick, just to kind of define within state law um, what a assisted living residence is or community is, there's three types in the state law. There's assisted living. There's adult care homes. That's one. There's adult care homes that serve only elderly persons. That's two. And there's multi-unit assisted housing with services. That's three. So those are the three types of facilities that fall under the state law or state statute for assisted living residents. So when you majority of these community or these these facilities within communities are really those that are there for elderly persons. So, okay, I was like, okay. And then I started seeing this other checkbox that said, will you have a special care unit or a memory care unit? I'm like, what is this? So when you go in state law, it says, as used in this section, elderly person means, and there's two parameters. One parameter is any person who has attained the age of 55 or older and requires assistance with activities of daily living, housing, and services. Or, so that's one. Now there's a second one, which is B. B is any adult, no age, any adult who has a primary diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or other form of dementia who requires assistance with activities of daily living, housing, and services provided by a licensed Alzheimer's and dementia care unit. So I was like, okay, what is this? So some of these assisted living communities have what they call memory care units. Now, it's not greater because that they're kind of compartmentalizing all of this under Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's, I know. Again, we have a lot of people with Alzheimer's. We have a lot of people who are younger getting Alzheimer's, but it's really keying in on the other part of that part of the paragraph, which is other forms of dementia, and that is really the category that Huntington's will fall under. That's the category that a lot of these rare diseases will fall in. And so when a facility says they have a memory care unit, based on their license, they should be considering any adult that has this diagnosis or these type of diseases. So I went back and I'm like, I would call these communities again and I would be like, okay, so do you accept Medicaid? Yes. Do you uh, um, do you have a memory care unit? And then I would say, okay, I would say, do you have a memory care unit? And they would say yes. And I would say, okay, here's my case. And then again, the majority of them would come back and say, oh, they have to be 55 or older. And even after I explained the state law, they just didn't seem to know it. They didn't seem to understand that parameter. They didn't seem to even it didn't even ring a bell to them that this was a thing. Um, so be cautious though with memory care units. I did talk to a lot of administrators, and communities had different type of memory care units. Some are just wings within the community that gets extra surveillance because people have memory issues. Others more are kind of lockdown units. But the fact is, the state law says if you say you will have one, you have to at least consider all adults that may have Alzheimer's or other dementia care requirements. And even there's a supplement article on the website that you can look up or people can look up that is a special care unit supplement. With that, it actually goes more broad. It actually goes out and says special needs within that capability. So that really is the area within assisted living that has to be there have to be some things fixed as far as making sure these assisted living communities that are licensed in the state of North Carolina, who say they provide that capability, are being held accountable for considering people who are below the age of 55. Now, with nursing homes or skilled nursing, age is not a thing. So that's another thing you have to be cautious of. If you go straight to skilled nursing level of care, or to a community that has assisted living and skilled nursing, which I would recommend for people with Huntington's, because once you get someone into a community, if you want to start at assisted living, you can always migrate internally in the same facility. It's less stress on the person. It's less, the staff already knows the individual. There's a lot of love and care already built in to that relationship there. So those are highly recommended by me. But just know that the nursing homes, by definition, are any facility which is advertised, announced, or maintained for the express or implied purpose of providing nursing or convalescent care for three or more persons unrelated to the licensee. And then it goes into things they don't do, like X-ray facilities and lab work. They're not hospitals. They're basically say they have an expanded nursing capability to care for people with certain medical conditions beyond assisted living. Now, every nursing home in the state has to have or sign what's called a civil rights information request for Medicare certification. And that it basically says that they will not discriminate, and this is based off of federal civil rights laws. They will not discriminate based on race, color, national origin, disability, or age in accordance with federal law. So, no nursing home should be providing a blanket denial to anyone of any age without a thorough review of that person's case. Um, so, with state law, again, it's very clear that if people, and there's a law that says your license can be revoked or suspended if a licensee has substantially failed to comply with the provisions of the statute. So the law's there. That's the good thing is, we're not trying to create new law. The law is there. The problem is sometimes laws aren't enforced, right? So that's the issue is this law, the enforcing agency ultimately is the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. They put the inspection requirement on the counties. So the fact is, what I discovered is when I went to my county advocates and said, hey, this law, do you all check on this? No, they don't. When they inspect these facilities, they don't inspect them on the amount of denials that they're giving people. So if you call a community and they say, hey, I'm sorry, they're too young, or we don't have the capability, that is technically discrimination. And now with assisted living, like I said, there is the parameter where if they are designed to care for the elderly and they don't have a memory care unit, yes, they can say we only provide care to 55 and older. But if they have a memory care unit, then they ultimately should be inspected on the amount of people who are coming to them and being denied for potential care in a memory care unit. So ultimately, that is where the gap is. The gap is the communities, many of them don't fully understand their licensing requirements. And they aren't inspected for accountability. So when these inspection mechanisms come to the facility, I would assume from the county social services office, they aren't saying, okay, I want to see your records for all denials in writing that say why you denied someone who asked to enter your facility. And personally, I feel that if that just was placed into inspection checks, a lot of these, it will change the culture. It will ensure that people are at least honestly considered. And when I say honestly considered, what I mean is when you have an FL2, if you have a physician that says, okay, yes, I agree that they should be provided this level of care, if the facility by law it says in their license that they are supposed to have this capability, there should at least be an application submitted and a thorough evaluation of the case. Now, look, denials, a lot of facilities don't have bed space. So, again, that's just going to be a problem from the get go. But there should, and also when you get into care capabilities, a facility may say, look, I'm short staffed. I don't have the ability. I'm just telling you, like, I don't have the ability to care for this complex disease right now. Those are honest responses. What's not an honest response is again, going back to if they're supposed to accept people under 55, that they say they don't. So that's not honest or legal. And the other one is we don't take people with Huntington's disease. Now that's flat out discrimination based on federal civil rights laws. And there is an advocate for you for that. There is the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights, and that's an office that's supposed to hold entities accountable for civil rights violations. So again, be cautious of that. But again, we're not here. My efforts really aren't to throw these organizations, communities under the bus. They do amazing things. They're immensely stressed. They're immensely understaffed. And as I've gotten to know these people, they are incredible. These are people who don't get paid a whole lot of money, and they take care. They do things from a care perspective that are unbelievable, and they truly love these people. They are family to them. So it's not about going and throwing them under the bus so they get in trouble. It's about ensuring they understand the laws, and also ensuring that our lawmakers and our government officials apply the law so that there's not people who may not have the ability still or the fire in them to fight, because I guarantee you there's plenty of people out there who were in my position who have just given up, and they just have given up on the process. They have horrible home experiences. The level of elderly abuse in homes has skyrocketed. That's not a good thing. We know that. That's never something that's acceptable. However, the tension at homes in these diseases is beyond belief. And this would help the system if we can get this mitigated. So I hope that I know that's long winded, but I kind of give you the synopsis of the entire journey and sort of what the issues are, and hopefully things we can get done to make this better.
Yeah. Well, where do we go from here?
My recommendation, one thing I've done, at least I've obviously taken a lot of time off just to focus on my family unit. But one thing I'm immensely passionate about is going back and re-engaging with our elected officials. For one, I can tell you, look, this issue, as we know, doesn't get people elected. There's a very small community of us out there who are dealing with these issues, so it's very easy for us to fall beneath the cracks. Um, However, if we can go back and re-engage with lawmakers and say, okay, there's some things in law that could be better. One is, why are we clumping in people with neurological, neurodegenerative, rare diseases in with the elderly? It's confusing. When I never think of somebody who's below a certain age as elderly in any scenario. So to have a law with assisted living that says, hey, yeah, elderly can also be these people, it's confusing. And also categorizing it all after Alzheimer's becomes confusing. So a lot of these communities will see Alzheimer's and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's it. That's it. It's not. It's not it. Go through the rest of the law. There's a lot of things in there that should be accounted for, but they see that first shiny object, and that's Alzheimer's. So the first thing for me is we need to go back and ensure that that law is modified, that there's some word changes to say, okay, look, there's this community of people. As we know, there's people that younger now getting ALS, getting Parkinson's, getting Alzheimer's, getting MS. And then, of course, there's the Huntington's community. They're getting younger. And as that happens, there's going to need to be more help for them in particular. And if we lump them in all under the elderly, then they're going to fall in the cracks. And Erica, there's one other point that I want to make sure people know that became really frustrating was many communities referred us to, and going back to what assisted living communities are, right? There's three types. So adult care homes can include homes for those with mental incapacitations, the mentally ill, intellectual disabilities. I I couldn't tell you the number of times that people would refer me to those homes. That those are not homes for neurodegenerative diseases. They are not homes for people with Huntington's disease. And they will tell you that when you call those communities, they'll say, no, 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 these are for diseases that are specific to you're born with an intellectual disability or you've had some sort of catastrophic um, brain injury. And they are not by any means designed for these people. Um, and that became extremely frustrating because for people to say, hey, look, this disease belongs here, it's not. Those people, again, I hate that those people have those issues and they need help, but they're not like items. And for our system to even still believe that in 2024 is frustrating. Um, and um, that goes into sort of when you're dealing with someone with Huntington's, that it starts to deal with the mental health issues. We all know, like some of the first manifestations you're going to see with the wiring issues in the brain are going to be issues with mental health and aggression and agitation. And sometimes your only help is to go to your local hospital and seek, where can I at least get this person somewhere away to where they can recenter, get the right medicines. And a lot of hospitals, of course, have mental health units. And I can tell you, New Bern, Carolina East, has a great mental health unit, and they were immensely compassionate with Heather's situation because there were a few situations that we just needed to get Heather recentered because her medications weren't quite right. Um, but another frustration with that is, that you take them in for initial intake, and the required mechanism to keep them in the hospital is what's called an involuntary commitment. As a former magistrate in Virginia, I dealt with a lot of these um, temporary protective orders or detention orders and things like that were designed to have a social worker evaluate a person and then come up with a plan of bringing them back to help to center mentally. And there really was no other avenue for us in those situations. The frustrating part is when that process is solidified at the hospital with an involuntary commitment, that person then becomes restrained. They have to handcuff them to move them. So the law enforcement officers have to come in because it becomes a legal process. And just to move Heather, my 110-pound wife, who was non-combative, from the intake to the mental health unit, she was handcuffed, and that was an automatic protocol. And that's another thing where we just have to look at law and say, okay, we have this group of people who deal with this very complicated and complex issue, and are we really serving them in the right way? Are they falling beneath the cracks? They're falling beneath the cracks in how they're processed during involuntary commitments. They're falling through the gaps when it comes to ensuring all law enforcement offices are fully trained on how they deal with people with neurodegenerative diseases that may cause involuntary movements. And we're failing in relation to how law pulls them out of current assisted living and nursing home laws outside of the elderly, outside of Alzheimer's. And so to me, it starts with elected officials. It starts with that first level of departmental leadership within state offices, specifically the Department of Health and Human Resource, Health and Human Services. Then once they do it, the counties will comply. So once they say, hey, we have to change these inspections to include 100% denial checks for all cases, there has to be a letter in writing, a thorough application that your denial was based on care capabilities, not these things. And there has to be accountability for that. Nothing will change until there is accountability. Once there's accountability, then the culture will change. These communities will become more educated, and in that dynamic, I truly believe will get better.
Thank you, Grant. You helped really give such an honest perspective from somebody who has gone through it, while also a professional perspective of your experience as a professional, as somebody who is dedicated to changing policy and getting into, how do we actually make systemic change? And I think it's so refreshing to hear this. And I hope that, for you, anybody who's watching this webinar, that this reignites you. It helps you know the steps to take if you do need to find a community for your loved one, an extended community. I love that term of this is an extension of your home already. It's just additional family members that you're adding. It's an additional space where your loved one can be safe, where you can love them in another environment. But thank you, Grant, for being here, and thank you for explaining all of this. And I look forward to changing things here in North Carolina, all over, but especially here in North Carolina to start, and then we'll think bigger.
Yeah, and like you said, I really I like I told you at the very beginning before the webinar, I had done some initial research on Virginia, and I ran
Mhm.
into almost the same issue with a facility, a skilled nursing facility, flat out from the beginning telling me we don't accept people with Huntington's.
Yep.
So this is, I think, an issue that nationally, even though every state Medicaid again is a national mechanism, but the states apply it, then it goes down to the county. So, a lot of the dynamics are going to be the same within states. So I think, once you see some systemic change within one state or some good things happening,
Mhm.
you really will see the change across the country with how these cases are dealt with. But I would, like just to close it out for me, anyone who is being marginalized within their communities who have any of these diseases, they should not be in that situation. And I would say, especially like HD Reach, make contact with these organizations. HD Reach has done amazing things for my family. You've always been reliable to call for advice and to assist. And Erica, like I'll give you a plug for even coming to Bayview to give them amazing training on HD. And just to go back to the beginning, it's amazing how when I started at Bayview with Heather, they had no idea. They were clueless. They had the love and compassion um, to accept her. And I think I told you. I think I put it somewhere in the discussion that there was a good news story with the ombudsman. Well, the funny story is the ombudsman got me in contact with a lady who worked for the firm that owns Bayview called Century Management. She contacted me, and strangely enough, she had a very similar story that we had. She had a father who was needing long-term care at a younger age, and she knows the pain. And she was our true advocate to get us into Bayview. And then after those initial barriers were broken down with the staff in relation to how HD works, they are the most wonderful advocates for HD now. They do everything to promote HD awareness. They love Heather. Heather is thriving within a multi generational community within the facility. So be cautious of those stigmas that are out there with age, with disease diagnosis. Because I can tell you, my experience, at least, I know everybody's going to be different, was that they were all false. Our home life, our extended family, everything is so much better now from a family perspective and our relationship, my relationship with Heather as a wife, my kids' relationship with Heather as a mother, because we all are in spaces where we can love each other, and it doesn't become where we're merely caregivers, and it doesn't make the best out of any of us. And so again, just be cautious of those dynamics or those stigmas. And then when you need help, don't give up. Just reach out to those advocates, and just find the one that really wants to be on your team and help you. It just takes out one person to be in your corner to make things better.
And on that note, that's it. Thank you, Grant. I'm like, I don't want to say anything after that because that was beautiful. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention to this, and your dedication, your loyalty, and your love for Heather and your family, and for the HD community. Period. So if anybody has any questions, please reach out to us. You can go to our website, hdreach.org. You can hit the contact button, send us an email, reach out to us. We have contact with Grant. So if there's any other questions, let us know. We're here for you. Thank you for joining, and thank you so much, Grant.